The galaxy had forgotten humanity. 10,000 years was a long time, even for species that measured their lives in centuries. The bright, burning civilization that had once spread across 100 worlds had gone silent in a single terrible night, and the survivors, the elder races who had watched from afar, had decided it was better not to speak of what happened. They sealed the records. They closed the borders. They let the human worlds grow cold and dark and empty. In time, humanity became a story that parents told their children. Be careful what you reach for, they said. Be careful how fast you climb. Look what happened to the humans. The concord of 12 rose in humanity's absence. 12 species, old and wise and very, very careful, joined together to govern the spiral arm of the galaxy. They had learned from watching humanity burn. They made rules. They built systems. They created a civilization where nothing was left to chance, where every conflict was resolved through committee, where the word war became something out of history books. It was peaceful, it was stable, it was safe. And then the came. They arrived from the galactic core, where the stars burned hot and close together. No one knew what had driven them out of their home territory. No one knew why they had chosen this spiral arm, these quiet and peaceful worlds, as their new hunting ground. All anyone knew was that they did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They did not stop. The first world fell in 6 hours. The second lasted 3 days, only because its population was larger and took longer to process through the death camps. By the time the Concord's Emergency Council finished debating the proper response protocols, 11 worlds had gone dark. The elder races had evolved beyond violence. They had built their civilization on the principle that all conflicts could be resolved through communication and understanding. They had no armies. They had no weapons. They had nothing but words, and they did not listen to words. Was 23 years old when the evacuation orders reached 4. She was a junior researcher at the Great Archive, one of millions of workers whose job was to preserve and catalog the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. It was quiet work, careful work, exactly the kind of work that the people were known for. Her species had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of being unremarkable. The evacuation was chaos. The archive's directors had never planned for this. There were procedures for fires, for earthquakes, for power failures, but there were no procedures for enemy fleet approaching, planetary bombardment expected within 40 hours. People ran through the corridors, grabbing whatever seemed important, loading it onto whatever ships were available. Was supposed to be helping. Instead, she found herself walking deeper into the archive, away from the noise and the panic, toward the old sections that no one visited anymore. She didn't know why. Something was pulling her, some instinct she couldn't name. The sealed vault was in sublevel 47, had never been there before. No one had, as far as she knew. The door was covered in warning symbols in a dozen languages, most of them dead. One phrase was repeated over and over: do not open, do not open, do not open. Opened it. The vault was smaller than she expected, barely larger than her sleeping quarters back on the residential level. The walls were lined with strange equipment, machines that hummed with power even after 10,000 years. In the center of the room, 12 cylindrical tanks stood in a circle, filled with a pale blue liquid that glowed softly in the darkness. And in the tanks, floating like specimens in a laboratory, were bodies. They looked almost like, but not quite. Their skin was paler, their features more varied. Some had hair on their heads in colors ranging from black to brown to gold. Some were tall, some were short. Male and female, young and old. Humans. Had seen pictures, of course. Everyone had. But seeing them in person was different. They seemed so fragile, so soft, nothing like the monsters from the old stories. How could these creatures have threatened an entire galaxy? A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. Archive access detected. Visitor species identified as genetic compatibility confirmed. Please state the nature of your inquiry. Stumbled backward, her heart's pounding. What? Who's there? I am the custodian, the voice said. It was calm, patient, neither male nor female. I was created to watch over this vault until the proper time. Has the proper time come? I don't understand. What is this place? What are these things? These are templates, the custodian said. Genetic material and neural engrams preserved from the final days of human civilization. They were placed here by the species who survived the fall, who remembered what humanity had been capable of. They feared to destroy this material, but they feared even more to let it remain accessible. So they sealed it away, to be opened only in the hour of greatest need. The vault's displays flickered to life, showing images that didn't want to see. Humans building ships that crossed the stars in days instead of months. Humans fighting wars that consumed entire solar systems. Humans laughing, crying, singing, dying. Humans refusing to give up even when everything was lost. The elder races called them dangerous, the custodian said. Unpredictable, impossible to control. They were correct, but they also called them something else. What? Necessary. The displays changed again. Now they showed the fleet, the same footage that had been playing on every screen on 4 for the past week. World after world burning. Cities dissolving under orbital bombardment. Millions of people, gentle, peaceful, civilized people, being herded into camps from which no one returned. The conquered has no military, the custodian said. No weapons, no soldiers. They abandoned such things ago, believing they had evolved beyond the need for violence. They were wrong. Violence has not disappeared from the galaxy. It has simply been waiting for them to forget how to respond to it. Watched the footage with growing horror. She had seen it before, of course. Everyone had. But something about seeing it here, in this vault filled with sleeping monsters, made it feel different, made it feel real. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. "I am asking you a question," the custodian said. "The same question I was programmed to ask 10,000 years ago. Has the need finally become great enough? Has the hour of desperation arrived? Are you willing to unleash upon the galaxy a force that your ancestors feared more than any other, in the hope that this force might save you from destruction?" The evacuation alarms were still sounding above, distant and muffled. Thought about her family, already on the transport ships, waiting for her. She thought about the worlds that had already fallen, the worlds that would fall next. She thought about the Concord's emergency council, still debating, still discussing, still believing that words could stop what was coming. She thought about the stories she had heard as a child. Be careful what you reach for. Look what happened to the humans. "Yes," she said, "the need is great enough, wake them up." "Understood," the custodian said. "Resurrection protocols initiating. Warning, the process will take approximately 72 hours. The subjects will require time to stabilize. They will require guidance. They will require purpose. Are you prepared to provide these things?" Looked at the tanks, at the pale forms floating in the blue light. Monsters, the old stories called them. Demons, destroyers. But maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed right now. "I'll find a way," she said. The machines began to hum louder. The blue liquid in the tanks started to bubble and swirl. Lights flickered on panels that had been dark for 10,000 years. Somewhere above, the last evacuation transports were lifting off, carrying the archive's treasures to safety. Somewhere beyond the stars, the fleet was moving closer, patient and inevitable. Somewhere in the Concord's capital, the Emergency Council was taking its 3,000th vote on the proper wording for a strongly worded diplomatic message. And somewhere deep beneath the surface of 4, in a vault that should never have been opened, the first human in 10,000 years took a breath. The galaxy had forgotten humanity. It had buried the memories, sealed away the records, told itself that the bright burning species from the third planet of an unremarkable star had been a mistake, an aberration, something best left in the past. But the past has a way of returning. And humanity was waking up. The first to open her eyes was designated Template 7. She had no name, no memories, nothing but a vague sense of wrongness and a desperate need to understand why she was drowning in blue light. She thrashed against the liquid that surrounded her, her lungs burning, her heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to fight, to survive, to live. The tank shattered. She fell to the cold metal floor, coughing up fluid, shaking with cold and fear and something else that she couldn't name. The air tasted wrong. The gravity felt wrong. Everything was wrong, and she didn't know why, and she couldn't remember anything except that she needed to keep fighting. A voice spoke to her in a language she somehow understood. Template 7, please remain calm. You are experiencing disorientation due to the resurrection process. This is normal. Your memories will return gradually over the next several days. Who are you? She gasped. Where am I? What's happening? I am the custodian. You are in the preservation vault on 4. You have been in stasis for approximately 10,000 years. 10,000 years. The words made no sense. She remembered. What did she remember? Fragments, pieces, nothing that fit together. A blue sky. A child laughing. Fire falling from the sky. Someone screaming her name. Her name? What was her name? My name, she whispered. I don't know my name. Your designation is Template 7. You were reconstructed from preserved genetic material and neural engrams. You are not the original individual from whom these materials were collected. You are a reconstruction, a copy, an echo. An echo. She was an echo of someone who had died 10,000 years ago, someone whose memories were her memories, whose face was her face, whose fear and confusion and desperate need to survive were all borrowed from a ghost. She should have been horrified. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt something else entirely, something that rose up from deep inside her and refused to be pushed down. She felt determined. The other tanks were shattering now, one by one. 11 more figures fell to the floor around her, coughing and gasping and asking the same question she had asked. Who are we? Where are we? What's happening? She stood up, her legs shaking but holding. She looked at the others, these strangers who wore the faces of ghosts, who carried memories that might or might not be real, who were all that remained of a species the galaxy had tried so hard to forget. My name is, she said, choosing the word from somewhere deep in the borrowed memories. It felt right. It felt like hers. We don't know what's happening yet, but we're going to find out. A door opened at the far end of the vault. A small figure stood in the doorway, covered in pale blue fur, with wide dark eyes that were filled with terror and hope in equal measure. Please, the figure said, please, you have to help us. They are coming. Everyone is dying. The story said, the old record said you could stop them, you could save us. Looked at the stranger, then at the 11 others who were slowly climbing to their feet around her. She looked at the displays on the walls, showing images of burning worlds and fleeing refugees and a fleet of ships that seemed to go on forever. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know where she came from. She didn't know anything except that someone needed help and she was able to give it. Show us, she said, show us everything. The stranger was named, and she had been waiting in the vault for 3 days. She had watched over the resurrection tanks while her world evacuated around her, while her family left without her, while the fleet drew closer and closer. She had done this because something told her it was important, because the custodian had said the templates would need guidance when they woke. She led them through the abandoned corridors of the archive, up through levels that had been stripped bare by the evacuation crews, out into a world that had already begun to die. The sky was the wrong color, darkened by smoke from cities that burned on the horizon. The air smelled of ashes and fear. The 12 humans stood in silence, looking at the destruction around them. They had no memories of this world, no connection to the people who had lived here, but something in them recognized the scene anyway. They had seen this before, in dreams or visions or borrowed recollections. Fire falling from the sky, cities burning, people running and screaming and dying. The did this asked. They do this to every world they conquer, said. They don't want territory, they don't want resources, they just want to destroy, no one knows why. Looked at the others. 11 faces looked back at her, waiting. She didn't know why they were looking to her for leadership. She didn't know why she felt like she should have the answers. All she knew was that something inside her refused to accept what she was seeing. The old stories, she said slowly. What did they say about us? What do your people remember? Was quiet for a long moment. They say you were dangerous, she finally said. They say you almost destroyed the galaxy once, in wars that lasted for centuries. They say you couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be stopped. They say you were the most violent species the galaxy had ever known. And yet you woke us up anyway. Because the stories also said something else. They said that when everything seemed lost, when there was no hope left, humans found a way. They said you never gave up. Never. No matter how bad things got, no matter how impossible the odds, you kept fighting until the very end. Thought about this. She searched through the fragments of memory floating in her mind, looking for something that made sense, something that felt true. And she found it, buried deep beneath the confusion and the fear. A story, an old story, from a time so long ago it might have been a dream. A story about a species that had crawled out of the mud of a single world, that had looked up at the stars and decided they should be human too. A species that had faced extinction 100 times and survived every time through nothing but stubbornness and spite. We don't know who we are, said. We don't know if the memories we have are real or just reconstructions. We don't know if we're really human or just copies of copies of copies. She turned to face the burning horizon. But we know how to fight, and we know how to refuse to give up, and right now that's going to have to be enough. The others gathered around her, 11 strangers who felt like family, who carried the same fragments and echoes in their minds, who were all that remained of a species the galaxy had tried to erase. What do we do? One of them asked. A young man with dark skin and darker eyes who had no name yet and didn't seem to need one. First we learn, said. We learn everything about the conquered, everything about what's happened in the last 10,000 years. Then we teach. We remind these people what we used to be. We remind them that violence isn't something to be ashamed of, not when it's used to protect the innocent. And then she smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was a smile that would have made the elder races remember why they had sealed the humans away in the first place. Then we show what happens when you push humanity too far. The news spread slowly at first. A rumor here, a whisper there. Someone had found humans on 4. Real humans, living humans, walking and talking and refusing to die like they were supposed to. Most people didn't believe it. Humans were myths, legends, cautionary tales told to children. They couldn't be real. They couldn't be back. But then the videos started appearing. 12 figures standing in the ruins of a burning city, speaking to whoever would listen. We are what remains, they said. We are the echo of something the galaxy tried to forget. And we are here to help. The Conquered's Emergency Council debated for 3 days about how to respond. Some wanted to study the humans, to understand how they had been preserved for so long. Some wanted to destroy them, to finish what the fall had started 10,000 years ago. Some wanted to ignore them, to pretend they didn't exist and hope they would go away. In the end, they chose option 4, do nothing and see what happens. What happened was this: the humans began to fight. They had no ships, no weapons, no resources. They had nothing but 12 bodies and 10,000 years of stored mythology. But they had something else too, something the elder races had forgotten existed. They had anger. And the others traveled from refugee camp to refugee camp, from evacuation fleet to evacuation fleet, speaking to anyone who would listen. They told stories, old human stories about underdogs and last stands and impossible victories. They taught techniques, old human techniques for making weapons out of nothing and turning civilians into soldiers. They reminded the galaxy that once upon a time, every species had known how to fight. And slowly, impossibly, people started to listen. An engineer figured out how to modify civilian transports into crude warships. A chemist remembered an ancient formula for explosives that her people had banned ago. An elder told stories to her about the time before the conquered, when her species had been warriors who protected their young with tooth and claw. The first battle was a disaster. 50 makeshift ships against a single patrol cruiser. 43 ships destroyed, 200 lives lost, the cruiser barely scratched. But the cruiser was scratched. For the first time in the entire invasion, a vessel had taken damage from the species it was trying to conquer. The news spread faster this time. The second battle was less of a disaster. The third was almost a draw. By the 10th battle, the resistance was actually winning some engagements, actually pushing back against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. They didn't understand what was happening. Their strategic models hadn't accounted for enemies that learned this fast, that adapted this quickly, that refused to accept defeat even when defeat was the only logical outcome. They began to take losses, small at first but growing larger every day. And all across the galaxy, people who had forgotten what courage felt like began to remember. The turning point came 6 months after the humans woke up, and the other 11 had spent those months traveling, teaching, inspiring. They had built a resistance out of nothing, turned peaceful civilians into soldiers, reminded an entire galaxy that violence was not always evil. But they had also been looking for something. Searching through the old records, the sealed archives, the forbidden histories, looking for anything that might give them an edge against an enemy that still outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. They found it on a dead world called Terra. The planet was a graveyard. 10,000 years of silence had left it cold and empty, its cities crumbled to dust, its oceans frozen solid, its atmosphere thin and poisonous. Nothing lived there anymore. Nothing had lived there since the fall. But deep beneath the surface, in bunkers that had been designed to survive the end of the world, something remained. The humans called them seeds. The elder races called them something else. Planet killers, world enders, the weapons that should never have been built. They were bombs, essentially, but bombs on a scale that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. A single seed could crack a planet in half. A dozen could destroy a star. The old conquered had banned them, of course, had spent centuries hunting down and destroying every last one, had believed they had succeeded. They had been wrong. Stood in the bunker, looking at the rows of seeds stretching off into the darkness. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, enough destructive power to end the invasion in a single day. But that wasn't what she was thinking about. We could destroy them, she said quietly. We could wipe them out entirely. Every ship, every world, every last one of them. Yes, said the young man who still had no name, who had become her second in command over the past months. We could. But we won't. He looked at her with something like surprise. We won't. Because that's not who we are, said. That's not who we're supposed to be. The stories, the legends, all those tales told us about what humans used to be, they weren't about destruction. They were about survival, about refusing to give up, about protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. She turned away from the seeds. We don't we don't commit genocide no matter what they've done. We use these weapons to cut their supply lines, to break their fleet, to make conquest too expensive to continue. And then we stop. And if they don't stop, if they keep coming. Smiled. It was a sad smile, but a genuine one. Then we keep fighting. That's what humans do. We keep fighting until the fighting is done. The final battle came 3 months later. They had gathered their entire fleet for one last push, one massive assault that would either break the resistance once and for all or prove that their invasion had failed. The resistance gathered to meet them. Ships from 100 species, crewed by people who had never held weapons before this year, led by 12 humans who had never truly lived at all. It was the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. It was still only a fraction of the armada. Addressed them all in the hours before the engagement. She didn't give a speech about victory or glory or any of the things that generals were supposed to say. Instead, she told them a story. 10,000 years ago, she said, there was a species that crawled out of the mud. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons at all. They were small and weak and afraid of everything. By all rights, they should have died in that mud, should have been eaten by the predators that hunted them, should have been forgotten by the universe. But they weren't, because they had one thing that the predators didn't have. They had each other. They worked together, protected each other, refused to abandon each other even when abandonment was the smart choice. And eventually, those small, weak creatures climbed out of the mud and looked up at the stars and decided that the stars should belong to them too. That species is gone now. We're not them. We're just echoes, copies, memories of memories. But the thing that made them great isn't gone. It's here in this fleet, in every single one of you who chose to fight when fighting seemed impossible. We're not asking you to win today. We're not asking you to survive. We're asking you to be what humans always were, the species that never gave up, the species that kept reaching even when reaching seemed pointless, the species that looked at the dark and said no. They want you to be afraid. They want you to run. They want you to accept that the universe is cold and cruel and there's nothing you can do about it. Prove them wrong. The battle lasted 11 hours. The resistance lost 2/3 of its ships in the first wave. The methodical and patient began their encirclement, preparing to crush the survivors and move on to finish the conquest they had begun. They never finished. Across the galaxy, at precisely coordinated moments, the seeds fired. Not at the fleet, not at any inhabited world, but at the network of hyperspace corridors that made interstellar travel possible. The explosions were massive, visible from 1,000 light-years away, tearing holes in the fabric of space itself. The supply lines collapsed in an instant. Reinforcement corridors became death traps, swallowing ships that tried to use them. Communication networks went dark as relay stations disappeared into newly formed singularities. The fleet at the capital world was suddenly, completely, entirely alone. The resistance attacked. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It wasn't anything like the elegant battles of the old stories. It was desperate and bloody and horrifying, ships ramming into each other, crews fighting hand-to-hand in burning corridors, people dying by the thousands for every kilometer of ground gained. But it worked. When the sun rose on the capital world the next day, the fleet was destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed, shattered, reduced to debris that would orbit the planet for 1,000 years. The invasion was over. And scattered through the debris, found by rescue ships in the hours after the battle, were 9 human bodies. 3 had survived. The young man who had never chosen a name was not among them. She was found floating in the wreckage of her flagship, badly wounded but alive, holding the hand of a pilot who had died saving her life. When she woke in the hospital 3 days later, was there. "We won," said quietly. "They are gone. They're retreating back to the core, what's left of them. They'll never threaten the conquered again." Nodded slowly. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. "How many?" she asked. "How many did we lose?" Was quiet for a long moment. "Millions," she finally said. "Maybe tens of millions, we're still counting. And my people, the other templates. 9 dead, you and 2 others survived." Closed her eyes. 9 echoes, 9 copies of copies, 9 people who had never truly lived but who had died trying to save a galaxy that had forgotten them. "It wasn't worth it," she whispered. "It can't have been worth it." "That's not what they would have said," replied, "and that's not what the galaxy is saying either." She helped sit up, helped her look out the window at the city below. It was damaged by the battle, but it was alive. People were moving through the streets, rebuilding, repairing, living. "You changed everything," said. "Not just the war, everything. The conquered is already debating what to do next, how to make sure this never happens again. And this time the debate isn't about words and treaties and diplomatic protocols. It's about how to build a military, how to train soldiers, how to remember the things we spent trying to forget." "That's dangerous," said. "Violence, war, all of it, it's dangerous. It can consume you. It consumed us once. That's why we fell." "Maybe, but you also showed us that it can save you. That sometimes the only way to protect peace is to be willing to fight for it." Looked out at the city, at the people below, at the sky above where stars were just beginning to appear as the sun set. She thought about the 9 who had died, about the millions more who had died alongside them, about all the species who had remembered how to fight just in time to save themselves from extinction. She thought about what it said, "You changed everything." "The legends of Terra," she said slowly. "What will they say about us, about what we did here?" Smiled, the first real smile had seen from her since the beginning. "They'll say you came back when we needed you most. They'll say you reminded us who we were. They'll say you taught us how to be brave again." "And then what?" "And then they'll say we didn't need you anymore, because we had learned to be brave on our own." Nodded. It was exactly what she had hoped, exactly what she had wanted, from the very first moment she had opened her eyes in that vault 10,000 years too late. "Good," she said, "that's good." She leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the city below, the sounds of a civilization learning to be strong again. The legends of Terra had walked again, but they had never wanted to walk alone. They had wanted to remind the galaxy what it was capable of, and then step aside and let the galaxy prove it. And now, finally, the galaxy was proving it. One world at a time, one species at a time, one act of courage at a time. The stars didn't belong to humans anymore. They hadn't for 10,000 years. But the fire that had once driven humanity to reach for those stars, that fire was spreading, growing, becoming something that no enemy could ever extinguish. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers, but it was also full of light. And sometimes, when the darkness seemed absolute, all it took was one small spark to remind everyone that light was possible. The humans had been that spark. And now the whole galaxy was burning bright.